Are you ready to explore exciting careers in neuroscience and neurotechnologies? Then join me, your podcast host, Dr. Milena Krastenskaya, or simply Dr. K, and my amazing guests on the Neurocareers Doing the Impossible podcast. Discover what it takes to turn the impossible into reality. Tune in now to a thrilling episode number 48. Dear Neurocareers podcast listeners, welcome to another exciting episode of our show where we explore the fascinating world of careers in neuroscience and neurotechnologies. Our aim is to educate and inspire you to pursue a career. It is my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Dr. Jody Nicholson Bell from the University of North Florida. I have a special connection to UNF as I've had the privilege of teaching neuroscience-related courses there for the past 7 years. Dr. Nicholson Bell will take us on a journey through her work in developmental psychology and Alzheimer's disease prevention research. So, whether you're a student, a professional, or just someone who is curious about the brain, you're in for a real treat. Not only will Dr. Nicholson Bell share fascinating insights into her research, but she will also provide valuable career advice and shed light on the many exciting opportunities available in this field. So, sit back, relax, and get ready to be inspired as we dive into the world of developmental psychology and Alzheimer's disease prevention with our amazing guest. And also, be ready for a wonderful surprise. Welcome, Dr. Nicholson Bell. It's a great pleasure to have you on our podcast today. Can you please introduce yourself and share some interesting facts about your current location and the institution you're associated with?
Sure. So I am a developmental psychologist by training, as you mentioned. I always gravitated towards really concrete, sort of tangible problems and really in health promotion broadly. So while I've applied my theoretical background and understanding to a variety of content areas, I was offered an opportunity in 2019 to work on preventing Alzheimer's with cognitive training, which is a large randomized controlled trial that's funded by the National Institute of Aging. PACT, the Preventing Alzheimer's with Cognitive Training, PACT is a multi-site study where we are using cognitive training to try to prevent the onset of Alzheimer's and dementia.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And you work at the University of North Florida. What do you like about this particular university?
UNF is really a gem of a university in terms of being able to offer students really quality experiences. So when I applied for my position, it specifically said that they wanted somebody who did community-based research. This is something that I have a lot of training in, and yet I was told as a graduate student not to put too much emphasis on this because universities didn't value it as much. So when I saw that UNF really valued community-based work, I applied, and I was so pleased to find an institution that really wanted to support faculty in supporting students.
Thank you so much. I think it's good for those students who might be still in high school and considering their future careers to know that this is available at this particular university. Did you always want to pursue a career in developmental psychology, or did you have other aspirations where you were younger? What did you want to become growing up?
So I knew I always wanted to be a teacher. My great-grandmother was a teacher. My grandmother was a teacher. My mother was a teacher. My sister is a teacher. We just knew that that was in our cards. I didn't know that I wanted to be a professor. And in fact, I did what I think a lot of people do, that I got to college and I was like, okay, I'm pre-med. because I knew I wanted to help people and I knew I wanted to be successful, but I didn't really have a broader lens. We didn't have podcasts back then like yours to tell us about different options. So I didn't know my options. But I still see that today. I see a lot of really talented and caring people saying that they want to be pre-med because they just don't know what are other career available to them. So I ended up also being a human development and family studies, or HDFS undergrad. And I've always been fascinated with children, but HDFS helped introduce to me the theoretical grounding behind their science. And that's really the foundation of developmental science. So we're really interested in contextualism, the idea of you have to consider nature and nurture in tandem. You have to consider the different factors that could be influencing developmental trajectories. So we know that there are internal factors, genetic factors. We know that the family is important, but we also need to consider societal influences and societal norms. We need to consider the infrastructure of schools. So really understanding the complexity of human development and trying to tease it apart so that I can design something by which to investigate it. It's really pretty complicated, right?
Yes, it sounds pretty complicated, and it's also interesting to know what background you are coming from. So, a background of educator. So, you already knew what you want to become growing up. Just the way it became possible, it was maybe a little different from your parents or your sister. Now I would like to invite all of our listeners for a surprise that I mentioned at the very beginning. I want our listeners to introduce to Daisy.
Daisy, okay, I'll have to let me get her 1 second.
Okay. Mhm. Hello, Daisy.
Oh,
How are you doing today?
good.
Good, good. Daisy, your mom was just talking about how did she become a teacher at the university. She said she knew what she wants to become already when she was growing up. What about you? Who do you want to be when you grow up?
I don't know yet, but I think I want to be a babysitter.
Okay, okay.
Babysitter.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you like about being a babysitter?
Well, I babysitted my little sister before. Her
Mhm.
name is Maggie, and well, I babysit her a lot of times, and I babysitted myself a lot. So yeah,
Mm.
And you're really good at helping out the other kids in your class, right?
yeah, I teach them a lot.
She teaches the younger kids. She's in a Montessori
Oh.
school. And so she's in kindergarten, but she teaches the 3 and 4 year olds different things about math and letters, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm. What do you like about teaching them, Daisy?
I like that they will well, I tell them what to do, and well, when they're done, I just tell the next step. It's like working out as a team, but you are just helping someone.
Mhm.
It feels good to help people, doesn't it?
Mhm. Mhm. And what do you think about how your mom is helping students? Because you see her doing things, yes?
Yeah, I see her a lot. Like one time, I actually saw her in a meeting, and she was like doing things like questions to me. It was kind of fun.
Mhm. Mhm. What else do you like about what your mom is doing?
Mm, I like her because she's helping people a lot.
Mhm.
That is the best part of my job. True.
Yeah. So both of you are doing similar things, helping people, yes? And you're teaching and helping, and your mom is teaching and helping. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, thank you so much, Daisy, for sharing this with our listeners. And I'm very curious to see how else you will be helping. Yes, when you grow up. So, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Nicholson, it was a pleasure to talk to your daughter who spends a lot of time with you and sees your work through your lens, but she still sees the essence of what you are doing. Yes, that you are helping people, and we will talk more about this. I would like to focus on this study that you just mentioned on prevention for Alzheimer's disease. So, how did you get involved with the preventing Alzheimer's with cognitive training study, and what are some of the goals and objectives of this study?
So we have 5 years of funding. It is a 3-year study for participants. So we're looking for people over 65 who are cognitively typical. So we use a cognitive assessment called the MOCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment. It's very typical in studies like this. And we also give them a depression screener, the GDS. So we're looking for people who, for their age, they are performing how you would expect cognitively. And we are asking them to do 45 sessions of computerized cognitive training. Now, this is a really big ask, but when you think about it, if you are going to run a marathon, you would have to practice for a long time. So if you are going to train your brain and try to make positive changes to prevent Alzheimer's, it takes a commitment. Luckily, this is broken up over time. So we're asking them to do 25 sessions, and that's probably 25 to 30 hours of their time across 18 weeks. So when they first enroll in the study, we train them on the computerized cognitive assessment training. We then ask them to go home and practice for a session on their own, and then come back and do a group session with other people in the study, just to be sure that they feel comfortable. People over 65, they may not feel as comfortable with technology. Sometimes they bring in their laptops and they have some questions unrelated to our study, but related in the sense of they're not able to perform our study if they don't get this question answered. So we joke that our clinical research associates are also part-time IT, and they learn how to answer a lot of questions. So then after they do their second in-person training, they go home, and that's when we ask them to start the 18 weeks where they do 25 sessions across 18 weeks. And the CRAs are there to cheer them on, to support them. They check in with them. They let them know if they're on target or if they're a little bit behind. If they are behind, they ask if there's anything that we can do and just try to encourage them. When they're done with those, we tell them we'll be in touch with them in about a year, and we ask them not to do any other kinds of computerized cognitive training. Now, we want them to still be engaged. We want them to do whatever they're doing. They can do their Sudokus, their crossword puzzles. We're just asking them not to do any other kind of computerized cognitive training. I think your listeners would be very interested in the second aim of our study, because it's examining the risk of biomarkers for Alzheimer's and related dementias. So we are asking participants, if they're willing, this isn't required for the study, but if they're willing, we're asking for a blood draw, and we're going to be processing the samples through the National Centralized Repository for Alzheimer's and Related Dementia, or NCRAD. This allows us to test to see if there is a moderating factor of genetic risk for Alzheimer's that could alter the effectiveness of our study. So in that sense, you can think about two people could come to our study, one person who has a genetic risk for Alzheimer's and one person who does not. And does our study work differently for each of these people? And that's really important to know, because as a developmentalist, as I said, I'm really interested in nature and nurture. Alzheimer's has absolutely both a nature and a nurture component, and the interaction of that, so an epigenetic effect. So we know that some people have a higher genetic risk. We know that some people have environmental risks. We know some people have both. So we really have to be sure that we're looking at that full picture. So the computerized cognitive training, you could think of it as a environmental influence, right? That's something in your environment that you can do. Whereas your genetic risk is that nature component, something that we don't have as much control over. And so that's the secondary aim.
Thank you so much. And actually, people are asking if this type of computerized training of apps that now are available for improving attention, improving memory, doing puzzles, doing Sudoku, is this really helping to prevent cognitive decline? What is known so far from the scientific studies, from the literature we have on this topic?
That is absolutely the number one question I get as well. People want to know, what can I do? So as a scientist, what's interesting is they're looking for that one thing, right? When really we know it's going to be a variety of things. And honestly, this is what brings me so much hope with Alzheimer's research, is people are coming at it from so many different angles, because it's not going to be one solution, and it's absolutely not going to be one solution for everyone, right? We have to consider that something could work for one person, but not for another person. So globally, I think the whole use it or lose it idea, we want people to stay cognitively, physically, and socially engaged as they age. Things that people may not know is what you're doing in your 20s and 30s and 40s that absolutely could impact your risk for Alzheimer's later on. Environmental things like we see that hearing decline has a relation with Alzheimer's. So turn down those iPods, right? You don't want to turn down that noise a little bit. We also know that there are things that are outside of people's control in terms of health disparities. People who have higher stress in their lives, which we will see with people in poverty, with people who have greater discrimination across their life, those people are at greater risk. So those environmental influences absolutely are influential. So getting back to your question, I know that's a roundabout way of saying that there are many things that could be done. And we know that staying cognitively engaged is important for aging. But we at PACT are looking in particularly at a certain type of computerized cognitive training. So if we can focus on training a particular part of the brain, there is some really promising evidence that's supporting why we think that this is effective. So I'll be able to report back to you in about 3 or 4 years with what we're able to find. But obviously, it's very promising, given this was a $44 million study from the National Institute of Aging. So we're very hopeful and that this can help us to do that next step to hopefully provide something that is easily disseminating, that we can provide to a variety of people, regardless of transportation, mobility. While not all people have computers and not all people have internet access, libraries are able to provide that. There are ways that hopefully we could be sure that this is accessible to many.
Thank you so much. Are there any already existing types of computerized training that are being used for this type of prevention, and how what you do is different from what's available at the moment?
I don't think I can actually answer that, because we do need to be considerate of blinding with my participants. So I'm gonna skip that question.
Okay, of course. Okay, we will. Okay. Okay. And what are some of the biggest challenges you have faced in your career, and how did you overcome them?
That's a great question. So I think that persistence is very important. And when I think about the challenges I've had in my career, it's the fact that I use the metaphor with my students. I saw a mountain and I realized that the only way up the mountain was one step at a time. There's some times where things seem completely overwhelming and it can sort of halt you in your tracks of it's hard to get started. But I think that I've been really good at knowing that that's the only option, is you just get started and you keep going. Sometimes it's not perfect. Always you learn something along the way. Always you can do it better the next time. So I think persistence is really a really important skill to have.
Thank you so much. And you are not alone saying this. We had actually developed a very interesting device to measure brain activity that can be inserted into the blood vessel. It's called stent road. So it's one of the revolutionary approaches to sample brain activity. And he said the same, that persistence is the key because it takes time for everything to develop. And it's just important to keep going and keep doing. So thank you very much for sharing that. What was the most interesting thing that you learned during your research?
I think along the way, what has been most impactful for me is what I mentioned earlier, the importance of having a community based approach. And in this sense, I think we have to be very sensitive as scientists of recognizing that what we find, you run your stats, you find something, it might be statistically significant. Is it meaningful? We also have to think about, is it generalizable? So what you find for one group might not be true for others. In clinical research, this is something that's really important because the majority of clinical research has been done on, originally, women weren't even involved in clinical research. It's only fairly recently that women has been involved, and it's mainly Caucasian individuals. So thinking about what we find and that we're saying, this is what you should do, this works. In the pharmaceutical world, we can say this drug is working, but really we're saying this drug is working for the people that we tested it on. So in that sense, I think just understanding our deficits in our science and trying to help to correct for them, knowing that we're still not where we should be with clinical research and generalizability. So that's been inspired by decades of research of working with different kinds of populations and seeing how something might be interpreted slightly differently, or something might be, you can say the same thing to two different people, they might hear it slightly differently. And in that sense, how are we making sure that this is something that is going to be helpful and not hurtful when it's disseminated?
Thank you. And I would like to talk a little bit more about Alzheimer's disease research that you are doing. What do you think is the future of Alzheimer's disease prevention research, and how you see it evolving in the years to come?
As I mentioned, there's just so much amazing research going on. There are some pharmaceutical studies that are being done that are promising and hopeful. Now we know that's something that is not accessible to all. So that's why I really love being on the prevention side instead of the intervention side. Absolutely, we need to know what to do once people already are showing decline. But if we can figure out how to prevent it or delay it even further, so that's where I think that studies like mine, where we're trying to make people aware of options that they have, something that I hope that we can let people know more about is what I was saying earlier with the idea of you can do things in your 20s, 30s, and 40s to try to prevent Alzheimer's. So education is a big thing. And again, not everybody has control over that. So that's where, as society members, we need to consider, how are we being sure that people have the option? Because education not only helps people to do their best for their livelihood, but it's going to help them to perform their best cognitively. And so thinking about down the road, how when people get Alzheimer's and dementia, it's very sad. It's emotionally draining for their families, but there's also a very large financial burden on society. So that idea of, if we put money into trying to help people to have better education and better access to education, that could save us money down the road because it could delay or prevent the onset of Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And actually, this is approach that many medical institutions are talking about changing the focus towards prevention versus treatment. Of course, as you said, we need to know how to treat, but if we can prevent it, then there will be no so much need for treatment, which is also very expensive, yes, very financially burdensome. So absolutely, I agree. It's amazing work that you are doing, and especially with this emphasis on disseminating and making it available to the society. Of course, people are very curious about this topic. Probably this is one of the most frequent questions that I get. Yes, how to prevent, what to do. And we had already 2 podcasts about the influence of music on the brain. I also know that current computerized study, it's not only one that you are at least thinking about. Yes, that you have some other plans, and there is some relation between art and music. So maybe you can talk about that as well.
I think what I've been speaking about in the idea of, I keep saying there's lots of ways that we can help Alzheimer's and dementia, is that idea of interdisciplinary work. So we need to team up. I know that I don't know everything. I know that my perspective isn't the only perspective. And so traditionally, I think in sciences, we team up with other scientists, right? So I would team up with somebody who understands the genetic background. But what I've done recently is I've teamed up with artists. So I established a collaboration with some faculty in music and in art. This has led to some really neat exhibits. So we had an art exhibit that opened last June. We commissioned some artists to basically, the idea was, what is the hope that research brings for Alzheimer's and dementia? So we have commissioned 4 artists total. Last June in the Lufrano Gallery at UNF, we had 2 artists that showed their work. One of them, she helped to share her experience with her father's decline with early onset Alzheimer's. So just a very powerful, seeing somebody's experience, having that, we know that everybody's been touched by Alzheimer's in some way, but having something that was just so direct. Then we're going to have the other 2 artists open this upcoming June. And then just last week, we had a composer who came and did a 3-day residency at UNF. His name is John Mackey. And Dr. Erin Bodner was the faculty member. She's the band leader, and she led her students in learning 3 of his pieces. And one of his pieces is called Places We Can No Longer Go. And it was written about his mother's decline with Alzheimer's. And why I think art is so important is that while we hope that there's a day that we will say we can prevent Alzheimer's, we know that day is not today. And we know that as society, we need to offer ways for people to process and cope and connect with this disease. And scientists aren't always the best way to, to help people with that, right? But artists, they help us to feel sorrow, to feel compassion, to allow for those emotions that can be really cathartic and important. I'm hoping that my collaborations with these artists help inspire other people in Jacksonville to get involved with PACT or other Alzheimer's related research. So just introducing the idea of them, connecting with them in the sense of this is something that is really ubiquitous and really sad and really important to society. But them offering, and you can do something, you can contribute to this, you can help us. And some people just maybe hadn't really considered that that's what research is about trying to tackle a large problem in society, and that their time and their efforts in a research project could mean prevention one day.
And what are your future plans in this domain of working with the Alzheimer's disease and prevention and helping people, families coping?
Well, for my future plans, my colleagues with PACT are typically trained in cognitive psychology or cognitive developmental psychology. That's not my background. As I said, I was trained more in community-based work. And so in being a part of PACT is what has really inspired me to want to know more about who signs up for our study, what motivates them to sign up, and what are predictors of attitudes towards whether or not they're going to stay in the study, whether they complete all of the sessions that we ask them to do. So again, it's that human side I'm really interested in. I want to know how we can improve in the future in being sure that we are more representative, meaning that we include more people from minoritized backgrounds, more people who are underrepresented. So I'm doing a study right now where we have asked participants what motivated them to participate. This was one of actually two of my graduate students. This is their thesis project. So they coded for different themes, and then we're looking to see if the themes differ based on race, ethnicity, gender, and age. And why this is important is you have to think that marketing influences generalizability of clinical studies. So how we advertise our studies. And there may be different things that will engage people into a study based on their demographic characteristics. So we're trying to see, are there any kind of themes and motivation? And then could we design some marketing towards those motivations that are more prevalent in underrepresented groups?
Thank you. And it's so good that you mentioned graduate students because this I already wanted to ask you how those students get involved in your projects and what type of work they have possibility to do.
I think for people who are interested in graduate school, it's knowing that you need to get experience to build up your resume and skill set. So you get the degree and that's one line in your resume, but what's after that? Aligned with that is you have to have 3 letters of recommendation. And so what are experiences you're getting? You're helping someone get to know who you are. So getting involved in research is great. Getting a job is great. Volunteering is great. Taking courses from the same faculty member, if you can take a few courses from the same person so that they could really get to know you. I tell people, when somebody asks me to give a letter of recommendation and they were just in one of my classes, I can say, well, it's sort of what I call a do no harm letter, in that it's not going to hurt your chances, but I don't know if it's going to help. Because what I'm saying is you took my class and you made this grade, but that doesn't necessarily speak to who you are. And to get into graduate school, you need evidence that this is somebody that people want to work with. It's not just that you are talented, it's that you have that persistence, that conscientiousness, some of those more personality factors that we know are predictive of greater success.
Maybe you can give some examples of the projects that the students are doing. You mentioned some of it already. What are other possibilities? If some other students want to join you, and also what skills are you looking for in potential students that can come?
Absolutely. So I would like students to show that they've had a wide variety of experiences to try to sort of integrate their formal training. So, you go to different classes and you learn different things, but then if you have an internship or a research experience, something where you can start to wrap your head around how all the things are connected. For some upcoming projects that I have, besides the motivation study is a really huge study, and I'll be working on that for a while because we have a huge number of participants. But we also have a phone database of all the people who we interviewed for our study. So if people contact us, what do we know about who finally ends up in our study? With the idea of, is there something systematic going on that prevents a certain type of person or underrepresented individual from getting into a clinical trial? So I have some research in the works of looking at not only the phone screener, but also we're asking people about their attitudes and beliefs about cognitive training and seeing if that predicts how they do in the study and their likelihood of completing the study.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do only graduate students work with you, or undergraduates can contribute to something in your studies as well?
I love working with both undergraduates and graduate students. I think it's the favorite part of my job is teaching through research. For PACT, it is a lot harder to get undergraduates involved because it does take extensive training. So they wouldn't be able to work directly with PACT, but I'm definitely open to students contacting me, and I would love to see if there's things that they can do to get involved. I know that it doesn't take direct interaction with data to still be a meaningful experience. And so I think I'm pretty good at trying to come up with experiences for students that match what they need for that next step in their career trajectory. And I always have a variety of things in the works.
Yeah, that's great to know. Looking into the future, how do you see the field of Alzheimer's research, Alzheimer's prevention? How would it be different from what we have now? Maybe, let's say, in 20, in 30 years, ideally.
Gosh, in 30 years, we will know so much more, because it really does take both that nature and that nurture. That, it's understanding the genetics, seeing if there's ways that we can counter genetic risk. And that's definitely not my area of expertise, but I'm so grateful that people are out there doing that. And that, in combination with more behavioral prevention techniques like what I'm doing, we do know that there's going to be a greater portion of our population with Alzheimer's and dementia just based on growth of our population. But I'm very hopeful that we're going to see some real change in 30 years.
Yeah, so we can counteract that growth in a way by preventing.
Right, exactly.
We have one question that I always ask all of our podcast guests. It's about doing the impossible. Maybe there is something in your career that seemed impossible at certain point, but now you see that it became possible. So maybe you can share what it is, and then what would be your main conclusion of how to make the impossible possible.
Yeah, I think I'll share in many doctorate programs that you have to take a comprehensive exam. So this is a point where you are really being tested for both depth and breadth of understanding. And I didn't pass my first comprehensive exam. It was devastating. I mean, that was the first time I had ever failed something of that magnitude. And it made me question who I was, if I was in the right field. I remember going to my advisor and saying, am I fit for what I want to do? And looking back, it was just such a naive understanding of the process of growth. And so I buckled down. I saw that mountain. I took one step at a time. I studied so hard for so long. And not only did I pass it the second time, but I saw that I thought differently afterwards. So I feel like I made a real qualitative change in my cognitive processing. And so sort of looking back and saying, yeah, that was really, really hard at the time, but it helped me become who I am today. And, it was a variety of issues. I didn't come from a liberal arts background. I went to the University of Texas. I took a ton of chemistry because, remember, I said I was pre-med for a long time. So I didn't have that rich background in writing and psychology that my counterparts did. And so I think that impossible helped inspire me today. It helps me to inspire my students when somebody comes to my office and says, I failed. Am I meant for this? And I can say, I'm evidence that you are, that you can fail something that's really important. And what's more important is that persistence of keeping on to try than the fact that you failed it once.
Yeah. So persistence again is the key. Yes.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. What would be your recommendations for those who want to pursue the field of developmental psychology and maybe even to focus on Alzheimer's disease, on the prevention of cognitive decline?
Try to get some experience in whatever way possible. So if that's, as I said, getting an internship with an organization that supports people with Alzheimer's and dementia, if that's getting into a research lab, and ideally both, because as I said, you not only need to understand the science, but you need to understand the art behind it. And so interacting directly with people who are being influenced by this disease that will change and influence how you see your science. That might make you say like, oh, okay, this is what the science says, but based on what I've experienced directly working with someone, I need to tweak that a little bit, or I need to, ask the right questions. So try to get some experience. That also helps you to see if that's really what you want to do. In psychology, of course, people really are challenged with, do you want the forest or the trees? I say the forest is the research, the trees are the counseling. So do you want to do applied? Do you want to do counseling? Do you want to work one-on-one? Or do you want to try to come up with solutions from a research lens? And getting experience in both is critical, because I don't want you to get into a program and then you finish it and you think that's not really what I want to do, right? So a lot of people say they want to go the clinical route, but have you had that experience of seeing people one-on-one? It's challenging. It's very challenging. I knew it was something that I couldn't do. And so that's why I went more the research route.
And for our listeners who want to learn more about your work, where can they find more information or to get in touch with you?
So I just had a website built. It is jsnphd.com. So my name is Jody Samantha Nicholson, jsnphd.com, and they can check it out.
Thank you so much. And we will publish it in our podcast notes with any other information you would like to provide. Before we end our podcast, what is your maybe last advice today for our listeners, career-wise or overall?
I get so much hope from my students, so much hope. Sometimes things seem overwhelming or really difficult. We have a lot of things that we're challenged with right now in society, but I know that my students are the answer. They are going to create great change. What I think is sometimes it can be overwhelming because you don't know where to start. And just knowing if you dedicate yourself to one thing, there are people all over the world dedicating themselves to one thing, and we will get all the things. We will touch all the things. We will tackle these. So I want to thank the students for giving me that hope. I hope from what I've learned in my career that I can help them to create the change. I know that they will have the answers, and I'm just part of that process.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nicholson. It was a great pleasure speaking to you, and of course, speaking to Daisy. So I'm very curious to see how this research of Alzheimer's disease, dementia, turns out, and maybe we can speak to you in a couple of years when you already will have some results to share with us. So
sounds great. I would love that.
I wish you all possible success, and with this amazing research and with the teaching students and doing all the amazing work you do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.